The first episode of Netflix's Griselda, she is struggling to sell 1 kilo in Miami in 1978.
Quite embarrassing. The lady was the #1 cocaine distributor in the world by 1975.
Griselda Blanco, a flamboyant woman nicknamed La Madrina, or Godmother.
A Colombian drug baroness.
A cocaine queenpin of sorts.
I would characterize her as the epitome of the cocaine cowboys.
Más conocida como la reina de la cocaína.
Griselda Blanco has been charged with 3 murders.
Griselda Blanco.
Griselda Blanco.
For the last 20 years, I've watched other people tell the story of my mother and our family. Now it's my turn to tell the real story.
I'm Billy Corbin, the director and co-creator of the Cocaine Cowboys documentary franchise. That includes the OG Cocaine Cowboys 2 Hustlin' with the Godmother, Cocaine Cowboys Reloaded, and the latest Cocaine Cowboys, The Kings of Miami 6-part docuseries, now streaming on Netflix. Also now streaming on Netflix, which I just watched last weekend, is Griselda, the scripted 6-part series starring Sofía Vergara.
Let's get to work.
At the very top of the New York Times feature article about the series, Sofía Vergara talks about the origin of the project. Quote, I watched the Cocaine Cowboys documentary in 2006, and I was like, wow, this character has so many layers. Thanks for that shout out, Sofía. And now we have come full circle. This Netflix series would not exist without the extraordinary and violent life of Griselda Blanco, and of course without the Cocaine Cowboys documentaries that amplified that story and brought it to the world.
They called them the Cocaine Cowboys.
They call them the Cocaine Cowboys.
Cocaine cowboys.
I'm joined by Michael Corleone Blanco, who is the 4th and youngest son of Griselda Blanco. He is also the author of My Mother, the Godmother, now available at mymotherthegodmother.com, also repping Blanco Family Fincas and Packaging Co. I got to tell you, Michael, with the exception of a small handful of people, everyone in the world knows Griselda Blanco as an almost mythological character. La Madrina, the Godmother, the Black Widow, the Queen of Cocaine.
She was the biggest back then. She was the godmother of the cocaine trade.
Griselda was worse than any of the men that were involved in this.
But of course, you know her as Mom. And so while I was watching Griselda on Netflix, I couldn't stop thinking about what you were thinking about while you were watching it. And I know you just watched it. And so I want to start there. I know you got a lot to say, and we're going to talk about how accurate the show is, what it got right, what it got wrong. But the first thing I want to know is, how did you feel while you were watching these 6 hours play out? And this, once again, you know, the story of your mother being told by strangers, which I was at the time that I told your mother's story. And we'll talk about that dynamic and that relationship later. But you're watching this show last weekend. How
does one feel? It's a rush of emotions. You know, it's very surreal. I'm not going to lie to you. It was very emotional. It was a point that I found myself gasping for air. I found myself happy. I found myself sad. And I feel that the story, our stories, my family's story, our universe, the Blanco clan's universe, the Blanco family's universe, is so complex and so legendary that it should be shown respect when it comes to storytelling. You're a master storyteller. You know what I'm talking about. I think the story deserved a little more.
Okay, well, let's start with episode 1. It's called Lady Comes to Town.
I have 3 kids and we lost everything.
And they're gonna lose their fucking mom if you don't give me the fucking kilo.
I see what you're getting at, that like this was kind of Griselda in name only, because this was just another kind of fictional kind of, or counter myth almost, of her life story. So, but can you tell me 3 things that you either liked or felt were accurate about episode 1?
The bond that she had with her children. I like that wherever my mother went, we went with her. So I like the fact that they touch upon it, or they try to humanize the character, and that was nice. Yeah, that's probably about it that I liked. Anything else, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it's like you say, it's some stuff just was far from accurate.
The first episode of Netflix's Griselda, she is struggling to sell 1 kilo in Miami in 1978, which I have to think she could have sold in the airport right off of Avianca. Like, just you could have sold it right there in the fucking terminal building.
I like what you said about the 1 kilo thing. It's quite embarrassing. It's freaking embarrassing. The lady was the #1 cocaine distributor in the world by 1975. She created the industry. Why would she flee with 1 kilo when the lady gets off a fucking jet and there's toneladas? You know, that was their first cargo. So you could say that my mother was the first official whale, because nobody had hundreds of kilos, 50 kilos. Nobody had laboratories. She pioneered the routes. She pioneered everything of the modern day cocaine industry as we know it. From the jungle to the laboratory to the cutting to the transportation to the street distribution. She did it all.
She had 3 sons. At this point in the story, in episode 1,
Exactly.
She got 3 sons with Carlos Trujillo. At that point, she was with Alberto Bravo.
Yeah.
That's accurate.
Yay and nay. That's another urban myth. So from my mother's mouth, when I asked her about her relationship with, how you guys say, Alberto Bravo.
No hay ninguna fiesta, Griselda. Perdimos 2 cargamentos más en Nueva York. Medio millón.
His code name, his nickname was El Capitan. Alberto was more than just a part of the family, and he was never my mother's boyfriend. They were best friends in El Barrio Antioquia, and they got married in New York for U.S. citizenship to try to get the residence and then the U.S. citizenship. That's why my mother, she was a resident. And my brothers were all U.S. citizens, all 3 of them, I believe, at one point. My brother, Ubed, we used to go to the UM games. He was an American citizen. I remember him telling me, look, I swore to the flag. I said, good for you. The urban myth of her in love with Alberto Bravo, and also the fact that she killed Alberto Bravo, that is also lies.
Griselda, in her anger, she reached down to her ostrich skin boot and whipped out a pistol. At the very same time, Alberto pulled out a Uzi. So about the same moment, they fired on each other. Alberto was shot in his face. So he died before he hit the ground.
What did your mother tell you happened with Alberto Bravo about his death?
Alberto was our transportation. They were good friends since El Barrio Antioquia. They grew up poor. You know, they were very humble people in La Santísima Trinidad, also known as Barrio Antioquia. It's the birthplace of the Medellín drug cartel, most Colombian cartels.
I come from a small village, very poor, but very, very beautiful. It's the #1 village in all Colombia for all the, what's the word?
Murders.
Yes, the murders.
Pestañitas, Carlos Trujillo, my brother's father, was real good friends con El Capitan también, but he would always hang out in my mother's side of the neighborhood. My mother would tell me, you know, there was 2 sides of El Barrio Antioquia. Alberto joins the Colombian Navy, so they call him El Capitan. So when my mom, after they went to New York and they had the mules, El Capitan was, he understood what it was to transport, to smuggle. So he said, why not use all the boats from the Navy or from people that are, you know, in the marine type of lifestyle from Colombia. Those were the first routes. It was first for marijuana, just how, you know, we know how all the cocaine cowboys from Miami, Mickey Mundanes, the John Roberts, and their smuggling routes also began first with tons of marijuana. And that's what they did first in the boats. When the organization and distribution of the mules was running like a well-oiled machine, then they got into the boat and the containers. And
so they were doing mules with marijuana.
Yeah, that's how they started.
Okay.
I remember my mom telling me a story that the overcoats, the New York overcoats, you know, those cream color overcoats, the long coats, right? Raincoats, that the bud was so big that they transport the mules that you could see the outline of the bud of the coat. And
like trench coats,
yeah,
like
the
this.
trench coats. And Carlos Pestañitas would tell her, Gorda, Mira eso, look at those trench coats. I can see the weed. And then my dad would tell her, you could see the freaking bud. And she would say, stop hating. Don't give me negative energy. We're going to get them all through. Look at them. They're beautiful. And that was New York, when she touched in New York. That was before Alberto.
What time period is this, roughly?
60s.
Late 60s?
Late 60s.
Right.
Alberto comes into the picture early 70s when he's in New York. And
this is the part of the story that the Netflix series totally
left
leaps.
out.
Yeah, they kind of reference it that she and Alberto were working in New York in cocaine, but that's kind of in passing. So this is how they really get started then, or she really gets started.
Yes.
Why New York? Why'd she come to New York?
The first wave of Colombian migration was to New York, just how the Italians had it in their time, with just like in The Godfather. My brother's father was the man that was in charge of falsifying the documents and getting other falsifiers to falsify documents. The neighborhood that
Carlos Trujillo, you mean the counterfeiter?
Yeah, Pestañitas. They lived in el Barrio Antioquia. Barrio Antioquia is next to what? The only airport in Medellín at the time. So they could literally falsify visas, passports, put the drugs on the mule and get them on the plane to New York, where there was some type of Colombian community. So all the first wave of illegal and legal immigrants that entered New York were all from what hood? El Barrio Antioquia. So she basically already had her distribution ready for her, because the same mules that would jump off the plane, she would house them, feed them, and give them corners where? Roosevelt, Queens, Jackson Heights, where it all started, where really the cocaine trade started.
Are they girls like in the show?
Yes, but regular people too. Even my brother told me there was a point in time that she would only send old people.
This is late 60s, transitioning to cocaine in the early 70s. Yeah. That's a decade before this Netflix show starts, which starts in 1978 in Medellin, and then Griselda comes to, again, I'm not gonna say your mother when I'm referencing the Netflix show, because it's not. It's like it's the Griselda of the Griselda world.
That's fucking itself.
Sorry.
I live in multiple dimensions at all times.
All right.
I get it.
Yes. It's a little Matrixy. The Griselda in the show is in Medellin, moves to Miami, which is, again, that's also somewhat accurate in that she fled New York, wound up in Colombia, and then went to Miami. So that is kind of accurate. What they of course they leave out is that she was a major duty operator in New York by the mid-1970s. Yes. So she is on the DEA's radar almost immediately after the DEA is formed.
She was the first person to ever have a 100-kilo indictment.
Just 1 month before the tall ship Gloria from Colombia, South America, graced New York Harbor during the Opsail bicentennial celebration, she was stopped and 13 pounds of cocaine were found on board.
Those indicted were Alberto Bravo and Griselda Blanco, along with 37 of her subordinates for conspiracy to import cocaine. This was the first major cocaine indictment against a major cocaine trafficker in the United States.
Operation Banshee, the nation's, the America's first major cocaine trafficking indictment, is for upwards of 140, 150 kilos, and your mother is the star defendant. Yes. in this indictment.
She was the first female at the time to place a $1 million bond. They caught her. They caught her in Queens. And they said the bond was $1 million. She paid it in cash and fled. So now she's a fugitive, flees to Colombia, and starts to control Medellin again. So she controls the routes.
Your mother was a fugitive the entire time she was operating in the era in which she becomes notorious. She was a fugitive the whole time.
Countries.
She
was a fugitive of Colombia. Later on, she becomes the most wanted person in Colombia.
So that's
why she flees.
So she flees from New York, from the U.S. to Colombia. Then she gets in trouble in Colombia. She flees Colombia for yet another country, Miami.
Yes.
And now is trying to lie low in a third-party country.
It's deeper than the Cocaine Cowboys.
So let me ask you, I want to talk about how she comes from Colombia to Miami. What's the real story?
The Cocaine Cowboy Wars didn't start in Miami. They started in Medellin before she migrated to take over Miami. Right. Because of whom? Papo Mejia. Papo Mejia had stolen the biggest ever load that my mother was gonna send to the United States. 1,000 to 1,200 kilos. At that time, nobody would do that. It's a ton or more, right? So as my family was back and forth from the States, he saw an opportunity to steal this load because they knew where it was.
This was an insulated group. You stick to your own, you stick to who you know. And all of these folks knew each other from Colombia to some extent. In the Netflix show, she is meeting Papo Mejia in Miami for the first time. That's not how that happened.
See this dog over here? That's Papo Mejia.
In the Netflix show, they're meeting in 1978 Miami for the first time ever through Amilcar, through a Venezuelan. That's not how that happened. No. Okay.
He steals the stash as a power move because my father was the godfather of Pereira. He's from Pereira too. He says, I know it's there. I'll take it, and now I'll be the godfather of Pereira, Dos Quebradas, and all these areas.
Your father, Dario Sepulveda.
If you're gonna attack a people's infrastructure and you really know about warfare, you might as well clip everybody's wings at the same time. So who would you kill? I know who he killed. Alberto Bravo. My mother didn't kill Alberto Bravo. By him killing Alberto Bravo, he destroyed the infrastructure of the routes because Alberto was the routes. So they bury Alberto, and my father sends the article of everybody's gonna die because of this. And they took out the dead body, they danced with him, they put mariachis, they hit the golden Uzi, they buried him, and then my father says, we gotta go back to the States. In Medellín, it's in a basin, we're in the mountains. So to exit the metropolitan area, you gotta hit the mountains to exit and then come down. That's why it's called La Capital de la Montaña. But if you don't make it out that bitch, you're dead. That's how they killed Pablo. All the exits were closed. So my father exits us out of Medellín. I talk about it in the book, how we exit in a Volkswagen with M60s. My cousin Memo was in the front. My cousin Arbe was behind us. He was young, but the whole family exited together. 50 people exited.
So you're saying that Papo Mejia killed Alberto Bravo. So that's at least the third or fourth version of that I'm aware of, including the Netflix version of it, because, you know, we covered it a couple different ways in the Cocaine Cowboys documentaries as we kind of got different perspectives and different versions of the story.
Alberto Bravo became the second dead husband of Griselda Blanco. And a new myth was born around Griselda Blanco as well.
She was alleged to act like a spider.
She became known as the Black Widow.
The other version, of course, which is what the version that Netflix kind of went with, is that your mother murdered Alberto Bravo.
Vamos a ver qué tan putas lejos llegas.
¿Quieres ver qué tan puto lejos llego?
In a moment of rage, because of the love, passion, never that. So
or even a beef over money or
yes,
drugs
position,
or
power.
Yeah. But none of that happened.
No.
To be clear, your mother's relationship with Alberto Bravo was basically one of business, and then the marriage was one of convenience.
Yeah, they were best friends since they were little. She told me I loved him like a brother, from her mouth to my ears. She said, but everybody says they were boyfriends and lovers. And I tell her, what about when he shot you? She said, shot me? He never shot me. Pestañitas didn't get killed by my mother. That's another urban myth. The Black Widow, she killed all her husbands. He dies of hepatitis B in a hospital in Queens, New York. It is public record. Alberto Bravo gets killed by Papo Mejia because Papo Mejia knew how to war. And he decided, if I steal this load, I got to destroy the infrastructure of Griselda and Dario. So let me kill Alberto también in Bogota, outside that restaurant, so their routes are going to be fucked up, and I'm the one with the 1,200 kilos. Kill them, and Griselda's going to have to war. And let me advise the military, Colombian military and national police, that she did this. And they also blamed her for a lot of military deaths. So she became Colombia's most wanted. Now she's a fugitive in not one, but two countries. But she decides to come back to Miami, not New York, Miami, and hide in plain sight.
In episode 1, we meet the Dario Sepulveda character, man playing your father, who is working in the world of that show as an enforcer for Alberto Bravo's brother. I'm guessing that's not how your mother and Dario met. And your father.
No. Their relationship was so beautiful when you know the true story. In that world at that time, there was a lot of unadulterated violence. Matter of fact, they came from an era called La Violencia, the violence. My father was raised in Pereira during those political times of unrest, that people would kill each other in the streets for their political parties. She runs out of bad guys, so now she needs more enforcers. My brothers were Pan American motocross and superbike world champions. At that time, they were teenage motorcycle kids, sons of Rockefeller, because nobody had more money than my mother in Colombia. Los Ochoas weren't even, they were starting out. Remember, my mother and Los Ochoas basically came up together, and that's why their relationship was so strong. So my mother goes to Pereira to take the boys to their Pan American tournament of motocross. She's hearing stories about the guy that robbed the First National Bank of Colombia. She hears stories about these 3 brothers that kill and eat from the dead. Matan y comen del muerto, like we say in Colombia, right, from Pereira. So she's like, I'd like to meet those guys. And then my aunt, which is my godmother, would tell me a story, and she's like, so your mom's at the motocross thing, and they come and get her, and they tell her, please, Rubén Darío and Paco Sepulveda are waiting for you in their stash house in Dos Quebradas. My mother's like, I don't care, I'm with my kids. They're like, they only have time right now. My mother goes, you know what? Make those fuckers wait. I'm with my kids. They have the race, and right after race, she's still greasy in her overalls, doing the mechanic stuff for her kids, right? They go to meet these gentlemen. My godmother, which is my aunt, was there. And she told me, everybody knows that La Madrina's coming, but she comes and she steps off a truck. She looked quite cute in her overalls full of grease. And she gets there and she meets Paco Sepulveda, Rubén Darío, Dieguito, which is my youngest uncle. Those 3 brothers controlled the bandidos in all of Pereira. She brings them 3 to Medellín because she has an idea to start distributing bazuco in Medellín. So a lot of people don't understand this, but the first crack epidemic, that shit started in Medellín. And then here come these 3 brothers, right? So now you got...
And bazuco is effectively freebasing
cocaine. Right. I mean, it's the base of the kilo, which later in the United States becomes crack, who got addicted to this drug. Back then, it wasn't looked at as a bad drug. It's not crack yet, it's bazuco. But in order to smoke bazuco, you got to be a millionaire, because that 1 gram costs a shitload of money, right? It comes from Peru, it comes from Bolivia, now it's in Medellín. It's not crystallized cocaine yet, but the addiction levels is way higher, right? But my mother needs enforcers to get the money back from all these rich people, politicians, people that wouldn't be scared of a woman. So she goes and gets these 3 brothers from Pereira that kill and eat from the dead. And they come to Medellín and they start collecting debts. My father and them were in charge of not only taking care of that elite customer and forcing them to pay their debt, but they were also in charge of controlling the neighborhoods and the micro drug trafficking. And they made a name for themselves as Los Pistoleros. The original Cocaine Cowboys were pistoleros.
So does your mother come back to Medellín with your father and your uncles, and she's still ostensibly with Alberto Bravo at that time?
Yes, and then yes, exactly. They're still together creating the routes, and now they have a team of enforcers that can open up everything else. Not only take care of Medellín, but we still didn't have the plan, or they still didn't have the plan to come to Miami, because my mother was a fugitive from New York. So now she's controlling. She's the godmother in Medellín.
Where is she getting the cocaine from?
At that time,
where is it going to from Colombia?
At that time, it was Peru and Bolivia. You know who the gentleman that plays Sosa?
Yeah.
That was really my mother's connect in Bolivia. But they didn't have crystallized cocaine yet. It was base. Because in Peru and Bolivia, they smoke base. So they would give her the kilos at the border, and she was in charge of getting them to Medellín. Once they saw that you could sell base, but you could crystallize cocaine also and sell it to the elite, that's when things got nice for them.
Where does it go from Medellín? Where does she send it from Medellín?
Queens, New York.
Still in that time when she was back in Medellín.
Still pumping all of Queens. They had an outstanding relationship with a lot of the Italians in New York. So then she was given permission to sell in Queens, her base, and cocaine. But then she starts distributing it everywhere with the permission of a lot of the families.
We're now in the mid-1970s. She had started in New York initially with the mules.
Yes.
So small quantities.
60s,
whatever.
early 70s.
Right. And this is the bras and the panties, similar as the legend goes.
My brother would tell me, you could even see the buds and in their panties, the cocaine would drip out the panties. It would drip out the shoes. My brother would tell me it was ridiculous how they would get away with it. And I would tell him, Dixon, how? What about the dogs? And he would tell me, what fucking dogs? There wasn't no canines at the airport in the 60s. And I was like, no wonder she hid. She had the mules. And then El Capitan was the one that started saying, look, this crystallized and the base, we're getting it to everybody at Studio 54, I believe it was. Let's just bring a ton or half a ton. First, they started with 100 kilos. That was the first time they became rich. They were rich. After the first 100 kilo transportation, they became wealthy in Colombia. And that was Pestañas, Alberto, and my mother.
Right. So that's like early, though.
Yeah, it's 1960. My brother was born in 1963. So he would tell me, you know why I'm so fucked up in the head, Michael? Why? Because I've seen it all. I saw it from the beginning to right now.
So by the mid-1970s, before your mother comes to Miami, what kind of weight is she moving at that point from Medellín to New York?
She's already the #1 cocaine distributor in the world. When she comes back to Miami, the law that was established in Medellín, and you can see it in El Patrón del Mal, you can see it in a lot of other soap operas, they basically say, now that we have the laboratories, Griselda gave us the routes and we have our own routes, and she's in Miami, we get the product, she distributes. And that's why my brothers later become the 3rd largest and the 2nd largest cocaine distributors in the world. Later on, Chiqui Blanco becomes 3rd largest cocaine distributor in the world at the age of 19. Chiqui Blanco was my brother John Osvaldo. They call him Ozzy on the Netflix series, I believe.
And he's like 9 years old for all 6 episodes.
The kids never grew up. I'm watching this series, and the kids fucking never grow up. I don't know.
Listen, if you're going to make it up, make it good. And some of it is fun. I'll admit.
I'm not going to lie.
Some of it's fun.
Here and hey, there's some parts of it that, okay, wow, that looks good.
But there's things that, like, were more interesting in real life. Like, there was that Godfather dynamic with your mother and your brothers, especially, where they were proactive in her trade. I don't want to give too much away. We'll get into it in the upcoming episodes.
Okay.
But to wrap it up on episode 1, what really brings her to Miami in real life is the Papo Mejia War, which is basically a war that goes on for the next fucking decade, practically.
Billy, if you want to hear the truth, that war just ended when he died.
When who died?
Papo Mejia. Papo Mejia became a rock in our shoe for 3 decades, 4 decades, almost 4 decades.
And we'll get into that when we talk about episode 2, in which Griselda struggles to sell 10 kilos of cocaine in 1979 Miami. Miami was already the Wall Street of cocaine at that point, and your mother was Gordon Gekko. So we'll get into that in episode 2, but shout out the sponsor.
If you get in any trouble, Ace Deuce will bust you loose.
That is, I was going to say that is the most Miami shit, or because Miami shit, but he's out west, right?
Yeah, he's out west, the Bay Area, one of the best bondsmen in the game. If you get in some trouble, Ace Deuce will bust you loose.
That is some Better Call Saul shit right there.
Yeah, no, exactly that. He's the man. Ace Deuce will bust you loose.